morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We are glad you are with us. A lot to do today. We'll celebrate some good news for Georgia basketball late in the show. They get a win last night against LSU, much needed, and it's a good thing for the Dogs' tournament hopes. We'll talk about that. I think that I have sort of figured out what might actually be going on with the spring game thing and why so many programs are seemingly into canceling their spring games. And perhaps not surprisingly, I don't think it's for the reason they are saying. We'll talk more about that here coming up a little bit. Terrence Edwards stops by. That is always a lot of fun. A lot of dogs in the Super Bowl this week, especially on the Philadelphia side. We'll celebrate more of that. Our Cody Chafin's doing outstanding work earlier this week in New Orleans. And to kick things off, a lot of people are saying some stuff kind of off the record, at least from an anonymous source standpoint, about what might be going on with UGA's NIL efforts. But are they telling the truth? Let's examine this topic and say what we know on this issue. Georgia in the spotlight for what it is, and in some cases maybe not, spending on NIL. Let's do that off the top. Glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I would say the most frustrating thing for me right now in our ongoing college football conversation, both as someone who kind of does this for a living, but also just enjoys talking college football with my friends and just as a way of kind of a pastime. The most frustrating thing is that the absolute number one hot topic that dominates every discussion in some form or fashion comes with so little verifiable proof of what's actually going on. I'm talking about NIL. You can't talk about anything related to how teams are trying to get better, who's going to win championships, or anything like that. You can't have any of those discussions without talking about what the teams are paying the players that they're playing on the field. But when it comes to the real specifics of what's actually going on here, all we really have is rumor and innuendo and whispers and a lot of people who frankly have a fairly strong incentive to lie. And that leaves the prevailing narrative, the hot topic conversation, pretty cloudy in terms of what's actually going on. Perhaps an example of that to kick things off here today. On3 has done a story where kind of behind the scenes, anonymous sources, people who work for various collectives, talking about what happened for the class of 2025 and the role that NIL played and how that class came together. And in one aspect of the story, Georgia was praised for, not quite using this word, but it's a word that we used the other day. Do you remember we were talking about the story from The Athletic about how, the word that sort of matched up with our intuition here, that Georgia's judicious with its NIL spending, that Georgia's wise. It's always nice to be kind of a wise shopper. My dad was kind of that way. You go from grocery store to grocery store and you kind of look, okay, this price is there, this price there. You make good decisions about kind of the things that you buy. The Georgia's, I guess, apparently pretty judicious around all of that. This On3 story yesterday kind of gave Georgia credit for that, for being among the wiser institutions in terms of how it spends its NIL dollars. But there's also a way to sort of spin that idea into something a little bit different. And this was the kind of thing that Georgia fans were talking a pretty good bit about yesterday. And in fact, a lot of people, not even fans, but a lot of people were talking about this in general. One of the kind of pull quotes from this story as it relates to Georgia, I want to show you this on the screen here for a moment. And obviously On3 is kind of in this world now where they use these and I think they're pretty funny. I don't dislike these necessarily. But they have these very sort of ostentatious graphics. This one says thrifty. It's got the picture of Kirby Smart. I don't know. Stuff like this kind of works on me. That's sort of very bold, very loud, sort of Carnival Barker type stuff. I kind of like that. So I'm not mad at him for doing that. But the caption on X says, Kirby Smart is one of the thriftiest NIL spenders in college football For some reason, college football's capitalized. College football sources tell Pete Nakos. The quote here, and this is from an unnamed person working for some collective somewhere, says Georgia got some guys for a steal. Kirby really leaned into some old school stuff in getting guys to come at a discount. So that's the quote from somebody who works for a collective saying, boy, Georgia just did a great job of getting guys for a steal and getting players for a discount. And Kirby Smart used some old school stuff to get that done. Now, here is what I think is interesting about this. Is there kind of two schools of thought on this? Like, I've actually heard from some Georgia fans reaching out to me or, just sort of chat with me who think that sounds awesome. They love the idea of Kirby Smart, in his position of power, leaning on that and levering that to say, hey, you want to come play for us at Georgia? You're going to need to take a little bit of a discount because we've got value for you that money can't buy. We're going to give you more than anybody else going to give you. Therefore, maybe we don't have to give you quite as much actual cash, actual money, because the true value of what we offer you can't be measured by money alone. There are a lot of Georgia fans who think that sounds awesome, and that's the kind of version of Georgia they really like, that's selling more than the, as has been said, Ohio State sort of bought its national championship, whether true or not, that's what some people are saying. A lot of Georgia fans don't want Georgia just out there buying players. They want Georgia selling players on what they get from, for coming to UGA. So they like the idea that Kirby can be thrifty because of all of the value that Georgia brings to players more than just money. And I get that sentiment. I understand a portion of that. But here's the other thing you understand. In life, there may be objective reporters. There may be reporters without bias who write stories just based on the facts. Those people may exist. But here's what I believe in every fiber of my soul. While there may be objective reporters, there are no objective sources. There is no one who speaks to a reporter without some sort of motivation for saying what he is saying. Some anticipated outcome from releasing the information that's being released. That's just something I happen to believe. So if we've got unnamed NIL sources, people who work for collectives, saying this about Georgia, our kind of just basic intuition would lead us to believe they are not saying this to be complimentary. Now, it may sound complimentary based on a version of college football that a lot of us would like to believe is real, but the people who are working against Georgia in these recruiting wars and in these bidding wars and things like that, they wouldn't be saying this stuff if they thought that it was helpful to UGA to be thought of as the program that's selling more than just money. They wouldn't be doing that. They, I believe, are doing this so they can take that big fat on-3 graphic that says Thrifty Kirby, and they're going to show that to every recruit that comes to visit them and say, hey, you can go visit Georgia if you want to, but Thrifty, hey, Thrifty, here's the graphic. It tells you everything you need to know from their perspective. Kirby's Thrifty. They are saying this under the cloak of anonymity in the hopes of getting recruits to believe, this is my perspective on this, getting recruits to believe that Georgia's not going to give you the money that we're going to be able to give you. So therefore, don't worry your pretty little head about even visiting Georgia, because On3's already told you Kirby Smart's thrifty, and do you really want to visit a thrifty coach? There's also the issue here of, well, if you're a player on the Georgia, because I can tell you right now from, having talked to people who kind of know some people close to coaches, I can tell you that one of the biggest issues that coaches have is not what you're going to pay to the future recruits, potential transfers. It's sort of keeping the guys currently on your roster, believing that they're getting a fair deal with their own compensation. And when you got, big national outlet like this sort of, blowing, and amplifying this idea that players are playing at Georgia for a quote-unquote discount, as described by some anonymous source who we don't know if that's a powerful, influential person or just somebody who's sweeping the floor. We don't know that. The idea that you came to Georgia for a discount, I can tell you right now, if that reaches the ears of perhaps some current Georgia players, and this is not even just true for Georgia, but any college player, nobody wants to be anywhere for a discount, right? It's like if you buy a house, you don't want to think you pay too much for it. If you get ready to, I don't know, sell something, you don't want to sell it for less than you think it's worth. People don't like the idea of making bad financial decisions. No one likes the idea of playing anywhere for a discount. So even though some Georgia players sort of like the way in which Georgia's described, I should say some Georgia fans, I mean to say, perhaps like the way that Georgia's described here, the people that describe Georgia that way, I would suggest, did not mean for it to be complimentary. It is sort of the idea of a backhanded compliment at best, but the sort of thing to sort of paint Georgia in a little bit of a caricature of a program that's a little bit stubborn about how much money it's willing to relinquish for some of these NIL bidding wars. Now, to be fair and balanced here for a moment, and to be candid, Kirby Smart himself has said things in the past that make these sorts of narratives a little bit easier to push. Let's go back to last July for a moment. SEC Media Days in Dallas, Smart being asked about the role that NIL is playing in recruiting, and if we're being totally honest, a sort of, so to speak, thrifty coach, the way that NIL, I should say the On3 describes Kirby, the so-called thrifty coach. Certainly the quote from Kirby, like this in the past, makes it a little bit easier to push that narrative if you want to. This is what Smart said about how he views NIL in recruiting. This is from just last summer. Take a listen to this.
Well, I think it's a mistake to assume that all players lead with that or that's the primary objective. I think that would be an insult to high school football players and really insult to all people being recruited, because I don't get to the finish line of official visits where that's the primary objective. If it is, we're probably not getting to that point. We're probably not going to be in the conversation if that's the primary objective. Is that one of the key decision makers? Yes. And should it be? Yes. I'm happy that these kids get an opportunity to improve their situation or make money and give back to their families, or in some cases, their communities. So that doesn't bother me at all. I have no problem navigating that. I've gotten less attached and said, you know what, if it's better for that young man because of a financial difference between us and another school, I respect that decision and opinion they have to make. I have to worry about the players that we do get. Okay, and I worry about the ones that we do sign, that they're the right kind of kids and they're coming for the right reason. That includes money, but it's not just money.
So I think that's an interesting quote, and I'm like most of you. There's a lot of what Smart says there that I think is probably true, and I think it's probably the right perspective to have, which is, hey, man, if all you got are a bunch of players that are only at a school for monetary reasons, then you essentially have a collection of mercenaries. And you might win, and we've seen some teams come close to winning with sort of a mercenary-style roster. But if anything goes the slightest bit wrong, you don't have the sort of emotional connection that sort of holds teams together the way maybe it did for Georgia in 2021 and at times in 2022. All of that makes a lot of sense to a lot of us, and it's the sort of thing we feel like we've heard Kirby Smart say plenty, and it's also the thing that we can kind of imagine sort of makes sense for how Kirby Smart might think. However, in light of the fact that you got On3 slapping this big thrifty graphic all over social media, I also have to admit, I kind of wonder if Smart had that chance to answer the same question in the same way this summer at SEC Media Days or this spring during spring practice prior to the portal opening up for the second time in 2025. I sort of wonder if Smart would say it exactly that same way, if Smart might consider altering his discussion point on that a little bit. We just heard Kirby in that clip from last summer saying that, listen, if a guy's main concern is money, then we're probably not getting to the finish line with that guy. That's basically what Kirby Smart just said there, which in one respect, it's every man's got to have a code, and if that's Kirby's code and that's Georgia's code, it makes sense to us a little bit, but there are some obvious problems that you're going to have if you do draw such a hard line in the sand on that sort of thing. In fact, let me show you another thing that On3 put out yesterday. This coming from recruiting reporter Chad Simmons in speaking to Justice Terry, the one that sort of got away from Georgia in the 2025 class. No surprise here. But Chad Simmons reporting that Texas flipped 5-star defensive lineman Justice Terry from Georgia for one simple reason. The quote here is, I don't know how else to say it, just a straight-up better NIL package. It's not a surprise to any of us. We assume that was the case. Georgia was the perceived leader right up until the very last moment when suddenly they weren't. Obviously, we're not idiots. We know that money would be a huge reason when that came together. But it does sort of put Georgia in a little bit of a precarious spot, at least in terms of how it's perceived by future recruits, their families, and just sort of the college football world at large. That Georgia does have so much to sell that goes beyond money, but for certain recruits, and oftentimes the very best recruits, if somebody else is offering a lot more money than you're offering, then the extra fringe benefits you get from being at Georgia, maybe perhaps you don't ever have a chance to really get to have that conversation or allow the recruit a chance to really reflect on all of the additional value you might be able to provide. I think this is a really kind of tricky conversation. And we're going to talk more about this later on the show in terms of a lot that might be going on in the NIL world that's simply not sustainable. And I think that sustainability is an important part of the NIL discussion. And Georgia, to its credit, has done a really good job of selling a lot of the same stuff it's always sold, even as money becomes a more important part of the overall discussion. And clearly whatever Georgia's doing, even to this day, is still working. They are the number 2 recruiting class in all of college football for 2025. But when you've got anonymous sources calling Georgia thrifty and anonymous sources saying that Georgia got players at a discount, they didn't mean that as a compliment. And as the national media sort of runs with those quotes, and as that stuff gets a lot of attention, it does become, I believe, a narrative that Georgia needs to change. What exactly will they do to change it? That's what's going to make the next few months very fascinating. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. What a great pleasure it is for us, and a privilege, really, to have you with us, no matter if you're watching video, 10 a.m. across all platforms. We even start a little earlier than that. We'll take some comments. We sort of set the stage for the day. It's kind of our soft opening to the real opening, which is the show there at 10 a.m. We give you a few extra minutes before we get going. It's a little bit like our R.S. Andrews cool down at the end of the show, but it's just sort of free-flowing there at the beginning. It's one of my favorite parts of the day. Love to have you join us if you're able to watch live. Most of you are not. Like 99% of the audience does not watch live. You watch after the fact. And we are appreciative of you. Even if I don't get to interact with you personally, I appreciate you doing that. Of course, radio, Athens Sports Radio 96 The Ref, podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Just glad to have you as a part of the show. And I really appreciate our friends at Merriweather and Tharp being on the show, too. Long-time partners with us here, and I'm grateful for that. But also partnering with you, perhaps, it may be one of the toughest experiences you're ever going to have. And I'd give anything if the idea of divorce, if the concept of divorce didn't even exist. Trust me, I feel that way passionately. But it does. And if it's reality, then the only thing that you can do is confront reality if you're given no other alternative. And I hear from people all the time in my personal life and in, obviously because of my relationship with Merriweather and Tharp, people who'll talk to me about this sort of thing, they'll just say, hey, I didn't choose this. This was chosen for me. This was something I had to do. And so now the only choice I have is try to navigate this process as successfully as I possibly can. And I get that. And that's why Merriweather and Tharp, I think, can be a really valuable resource for you. And for a long time, it's been true here in the Atlanta area. It's now true statewide, offices all over the state. So I want you to go to the website. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. You can tell them your story. They'll describe to you how they kind of view that situation. You can make the decision to hire them to kind of walk with you through this divorce process. They've got some very clever ways to kind of give you some cost certainty about how you're going to pay for this, and then set yourself up for success in the next season of your life. A very, very important conversation. So find them online, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. We got Terrence Edwards coming up in a moment. Always happy to have Terrence on the show. Also, later on, one of the things I've been very interested in as of late is the kind of, I guess, very unfavorable opinion a lot of coaches have taken when it comes to spring games. We love spring games around here. We're worried about the rash of cancellations, the suggested cancellations that are out there as it relates to spring games. So we are going to talk about that. I think I have a little something kind of figured out on this that's maybe not getting as much attention as it should. So we'll talk about that here coming up in just a little bit. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse here today. And I tell you, I'm getting more and more excited about the Super Bowl. Now, to me, I don't view this as the biggest game of the year. I view this as the last game of the year. And while it obviously is the biggest game, to me, the Super Bowl is a little bit like New Year's Eve. It's like kind of amateur night in a way. It's like, okay, this is the sort of game that sort of brings in the non-football fans and things like that. But I do want to watch football one more time before we don't get to see it again for quite some time. And I'm kind of into the presence of these Philly Dawgs and trying to stop Patrick Mahomes. I think the Chiefs' pursuit of history is pretty amazing here. We ourselves have a little bit of a backstory when it comes to trying to win a third straight championship. You know how hard that can be. Now Kansas City tries its turn at that on Sunday. I'm sort of into the game in a way that I think probably runs counter to a lot of the national fatigue that exists around the Chiefs, and maybe even to a certain extent the Eagles too, because we saw Eagles-Chiefs just a couple of years ago. And obviously there's the emotional tie we have to so many of these former Dogs in Philadelphia, and Malik Herring too. We had a great time with Malik Herring, some of the stuff from him yesterday. Obviously it's the emotional tie here that makes us a little bit more into the game. Well, we've told you our Cody Chaffins was at Super Bowl opening night on Monday in New Orleans. Got some great stuff. We've had such a good time putting that on display here this week. We're not done with that. Some more good stuff that you haven't seen yet coming tomorrow. But, we just spent a whole bunch of time talking about what can Georgia sell in addition to just regular NIL. And we do believe, even as NIL becomes more and more important and more recruits, admittedly, probably kind of view that as the sort of beginning and end of their recruiting conversation, we are still steadfast in our belief that Georgia's still got more than just a transactional relationship to offer its current and future players. It does have the sort of development that can make you a well-known household name, a tremendous legacy for time immemorial. We believe that Georgia can do that for its players. On Sunday, we're going to see a handful of players that stand out as obvious test case of that fact. In fact, let me let you hear for a moment, as compiled by our guy Cody Chaffins, several of the former Georgia players in this week's Super Bowl talking about how it was that Georgia came to prepare them for the moment they're about to experience. I think this is great. Take a look at this.
What did playing at Georgia get you ready for moments like this and stages like this?
Man, being at my second national championship, being at SEC championships, just, being a championship caliber team and being able to be in these big positions.
If you want to be developed and go to NFL and really have an opportunity to make a difference in the next level, that's where to go. They get you prepped, get you ready. You learn everything that you need to learn and able to make a difference here.
The SEC is one of the highest stage. Honestly, playing in college at that level, I don't feel like there's any bright light that's too big for us, So just be able to seize every moment, trust your preparation no matter what it is.
Some really good stuff there from Nolan Smith and Lewis Seen, and finally Keely Ringo. By the way, love if you're watching a video, Ringo's got the shades on for Super Bowl opening night. That looks great. We're going to do something on Keely tomorrow too, because I thought Keely was great in reflecting on a really special moment for him. That interception to seal the deal against Alabama in the 2021 National Championship game. I thought he did a great job of telling that story. We're going to focus on that a little bit tomorrow. I think you'll really like that. But this is what Georgia can sell. And I realize that we kind of live in a world in which, people are now interested in things in addition to that. But that doesn't make that any less valuable, I don't believe. The money matters too, of course. But stuff like that matters as well. And the great affection players like that still have for their time at Georgia and the influence that Georgia had on them, I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of Georgia fans will be, at least in spirit, wearing their Kelly green, or maybe not Kelly green. They're not really wearing that uniform on a regular basis anymore, but the Eagles green in their hearts on Sunday as Philadelphia goes for a chance at upending the Chiefs' pursuit of history and perhaps doing the rest of the country a favor, who is a little tired of Kansas City. Really good stuff from Cody Chaffins. We'll make that around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily. Also, before I bring on Terrence Edwards, let me do one more thing here just for a moment. We have now just 2 days left to get in on the DawgNation Kroger Cruise giveaway. You need to understand this, that if you want to sign up for your chance to win your way onto the DawgNation Cruise, courtesy of Kroger, you've got today and tomorrow to get that done. So here's what I need you to do. Go to DawgNation.com/contests. That's DawgNation.com/contest. All you have to do is simply tell us about your favorite moment from the 2024 season. In a year in which Georgia won the SEC, so many of those to choose from. And if you submit your entry, you could be selected at random, and you and a guest could be on your way to our DawgNation Cruise. Now, here's what you're going to get if you're the winner. Hotel in Port Canaveral the night before the cruise. That's April 20th. Then you got a stateroom for 2 on board Utopia of the Seas, April 21st through the 25th. We're going to give you a gas card to help get you down to Port Canaveral. And you've got some onboard credit to enjoy and spend while you're on board Utopia of the Seas. We tell you all the time, Utopia of the Seas is one of the great cruise ships you'll ever have a chance to be on. And someone's going to have their chance to be on for free, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. What an awesome experience. Now and Friday, tomorrow, February 7th, last day on this. So go to DawgNation.com/contest. Simply tell us your favorite moment from the 2024 season, and you could be selected as our big winner, and we could see you on board Utopia of the Seas. All right, before we're done, speaking of NIL, Greg Sankey has spoken out in a big way against some of the concerns he has about the impact of all of this. That plus the sort of burgeoning controversy around the spring games. And big news for Georgia getting a win in basketball. We'll do that before we're done today, too. So still plenty to come. But for now, the great former Dog, we love it when he's on the show, Terrence Edwards, here today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to Terrence Edwards here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Always thankful for Terrence's time. And Terrence, I was saying this a moment ago. Obviously, when you hear guys like Nolan and Keeley and Lewisine talking, it makes you feel this way even more. I'm kind of excited about the Super Bowl on Sunday. It's our last game of the season. I want to make sure I enjoy football because after Sunday, we don't get it for quite some time. How into this Super Bowl are you? A lot of former Dogs in Philadelphia. You got Malik Harry in Kansas City. McCall Hardman a little banged up right now, but he'll be going for another Super Bowl ring here too if his team can win. Obviously, the chase for history, 3 straight Super Bowls by Mahomes in that group. What's your kind of early impression on this Super Bowl right now?
Oh, for one, I'm not the biggest NFL fan out there, so I really don't have a dog in this fight. But if I'm a win-win on either way because I would love to see a three-peat that's never been done in NFL history, and I like to see history being broken unless it's my records at Georgia. But then if, Philly wins, I would love to see all the Philly Dawgs have a national championship and a Super Bowl championship. Yeah. So I'm just going to enjoy this Sunday, being able to watch the game at home in peace, and be a little sad because, like you said, this will be the last football game until spring practice starts.
You mentioned the Chiefs going for their three-peat. I can't help but make the comparison to Georgia trying to do that in 2023. And obviously, there are some differences. Clearly, the Chiefs never lose Patrick Mahomes. I mean, he's going to be their quarterback forever. Georgia is going to have, changeover in talent and, things like that. But we saw with Georgia, even as good as Georgia was for the most part in 2023, winning that 3rd straight national championship is just hard. There's obviously a reason no one's done it before. And in the Super Bowl era, we haven't seen any team win 3 straight Super Bowls either. That, there's something to be said for just winning any championship, and obviously winning 2 straight is its own feat. But, for Georgia, they kind of ran into just the natural friction that takes place when you're trying to do it for a 3rd year in a row, and now Kansas City tries to find themselves at the doorstep of that too. Certainly not easy to essentially do something that's never been done before.
Yes, it's very hard. I was fortunate enough to be able to win back-to-back championships in high school, winning 3 out of 4 in high school, and everyone is gunning for you. That you're everyone's Super Bowl. Everyone is expecting you to be this super team. So each week you had to go out and play your best. And with the Chiefs right now, with Georgia trying to three-peat, it's not the same team. I know each year's different, but one thing good about the Chiefs, number 15 is still there. Unfortunately, in college and high school, that quarterback is going to change. And when you have a quarterback like Patrick, it makes it easier to get back to this, but it's just so hard to win one, let alone back to back and a three-peat. That's just something we've never done. And it has never happened because it's so hard. So I'm interested to see if Patrick Mahomes can pull off this feat. But if he doesn't, I would love to see the Philly Dawgs, have 2 national championships and now Super Bowls.
So let me ask you about being at Washington County, winning 2 straight state championships. How did y'all, I guess, maintain the same level of motivation the second time through? Because it does seem like in sports life, there is a little bit of like fat and happy syndrome that sort of sets in, where once you've accomplished the championship, you probably just don't want it quite as much. How did y'all keep the energy alive to win a state championship for a second straight year?
Well, we won it my junior year, and most people thought that we were a year ahead of schedule. And then going to my senior year, that senior class that I had that I graduated with was just determined not to lose. Yeah. We were more afraid of not fulfilling our goals because we were predicted to win and were predicted to be the best team. And that fire was there because we didn't want anyone to beat us or have that to say, at least we beat the most talented team, I think, to come out of Washington County. And it's very similar to the Milton team this year. Last year, we was a year ahead. That was my last year at Milton with C.J. Wallace junior year. And this year, I knew that they was going to be the best team because they're so senior-led. That it was going to be hard for anyone to beat them. So they still had that fire in them to repeat because they was such a senior-led team. But it comes deep. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of things that have to go into it. It's a lot of luck. Because if I would have got hurt my senior year being the quarterback, I don't know what would have done to replace me. If Luke Nichols would have got hurt this year, I don't know what Milton would have done to replace him. So it's a lot of luck that goes into this. And, fortunately, Patrick Mahomes has been able to stay healthy and not miss any games. And that core of that team has been able to stay together.
The reason why I ask this is because if you look at like the last 3 teams to win national championship in college football, like Ohio State was probably a pretty desperate team this year. Their hated rival Michigan won the championship. Ryan Day may have gotten fired had they not won it. Like that's a pretty desperate team going into the playoff, and they obviously won it. Year before that, Michigan, you get the sense that Jim Harbaugh didn't want to stay in college football. He wanted to go to the NFL, but after having been close a couple of times, he wanted to win that championship before he went to the NFL. In a roundabout way, Michigan was probably a pretty desperate team too. Go back to Georgia, not 2022, but in 2021, people were saying at the time, well, if Kirby Smart doesn't win a championship now, when is he going to win one? There was a sort of like, championship or bust narrative being pushed on Georgia back then, and Georgia won the championship. They stepped up and won it. Now, some of this stuff may seem more true after the fact than it did in the moment. Perhaps that's the case. But it does seem like desperation has been a pretty powerful fuel in propelling the last 3 teams to win national championships to those national championships, and finding that same sense of desperation after you've won it, or in the case of Georgia, after you've won it twice, apparently not always an easy thing to do.
Right. They may be the same word that I'm about to use, desperation, or a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
I think everyone kind of have a sense of urgency, especially in Ohio State this year with losing to Michigan. And the players have to realize that, this is you're not going to get to the spot every year. So we got to have a little sense of urgency to go out and finish the drill, as Coach Rick would say. So you may use the word desperate. I may use the word phrase, a little sense of urgency, like to get it done, because you never know. This team is not going to be the same team next year. So let's go in and kick the door down now. I think that's what Ohio State did. And, losing to Michigan may not been the most terrible thing that could happen to them, because I like to use the phrase that they had a little bit more sense of urgency to know that we can lose to this type of team if we do not play the type of football that we're capable of playing. And with Ohio State, desperation might have been since, from reports that they had the highest payroll, over $20 million. So desperation and a sense of urgency, all those had to play for them because they spent so much money to build this team. It was definitely a championship or bust.
I want to ask you a question. There was a story from On3, anonymous sources, people who work for various collectives around college football, that described Kirby Smart as thrifty with his NIL spending, and it was suggested that there were players at Georgia that came to UGA on what we're led to believe was kind of a steep discount that Georgia was able to convince players to come to UGA for less money they perhaps would have gotten other places. I'm not asking you to reveal, inside information or secrets that you don't feel like you want to share here, but you do work closely with recruits who are in conversations with Georgia. Is it fair to characterize Georgia as a thrifty NIL spending program? And is Georgia getting discounts on the players that are coming to UGA?
I can honestly say right here in front of everyone, that's something that I've never had a conversation with a recruit. That's none of my business. I don't get into their personal endeavors or what they're trying to do. My relationships, let's just say with CJ, I've never had a conversation with him, how much he got paid. That's none of my business. Whatever he gets, he gets. I hope he could get the most he could get. But there are some things that are a little bit bigger than money. Just use an example. If Team A is paying me $500,000, Team B is paying me $750,000, what can I buy with $500,000 that I could buy with $750,000? If the development piece is there, if the living is there, if the vibe, if the relationship is all there, I'm still getting money that most people in their lifetime would never see. So I can honestly say I don't. That's the part I don't discuss with them. That's their family business, and I stay out of it.
Seems like it would sort of stand to reason that if Georgia has the number 2 signing class, the idea that it could get all those guys to take a discount, that seems pretty unlikely. In other words, hey, maybe to a degree there is a emotional pull to play for the home state team or the prestige of playing for a team that won 2 national championships, or as you said, maybe the developmental piece is so valuable that's worth money alone right there. There's a intrinsic value into that. Maybe there is truly some of that going on, but the idea that across the board that's true, given the fact that Georgia was still as competitive as anyone when it comes to the kinds of recruits it brought in this year, seems unlikely to me that the entire story of the class was a thrifty coach getting discounts on players. Hard to imagine that would equal the number 2 class in America in 2025.
Well, whatever Kirby is doing to get these players on a so-called discount, he's doing a great job of bringing in the right talent. So whatever he's doing is working. I don't know the inner workings of it, but if he can continue to do what he's doing and getting the players that he's getting, then why change?
I want to finish with this, if you don't mind. There's been a lot of talk lately about spring games, and Nebraska coach Matt Rule the other day said that he didn't want to have one because he felt like that after a year ago, people were trying to steal his players that saw him playing during the spring game. You've got Texas coach Steve Sarkisian, for different reasons, suggesting that he doesn't really like one for Texas. Billy Napier, the Florida coach, has been asked about this too. What do you make about the future of spring games? And, hey, maybe it's true that this is just more fun for fans than it is valuable, to the programs. Maybe there's a chance that's the case. But this is really fun for fans, and I'm going to give up on spring games kicking and screaming here because I do really enjoy G-Day. I don't think G-Day's on thin ice necessarily, but, boy, there are a lot of these other spring games. You kind of wonder, Are they about to disappear? Is this one more thing in college football that we're about to lose here? What do you make about kind of the precarious spot that spring games seem to find themselves in right now?
Yes, the spring game is definitely more for the fans because we're trying to come out of spring healthy as could be going into the fall. So I don't want spring games to go away because I enjoy them now as a fan and be able to get to see some of your up-and-coming players. But I can understand from a coach's standpoint where they're coming from. But it is 100% more for the fans than the players.
Certainly starting to feel that way, but as a fan myself, I'm going to be pretty selfish about trying to hold on to it as long as I can. Hey, Terrence, I know we're in February now. Bubble work is cranked up here. You're training that next generation of great pass catcher, working with some other great coaches too. If people want to be a part of the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy, how can they do that?
You can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy. And the first week down this week, and we had a great group on Mondays and Wednesdays. We have quarterbacks and DBs and receivers. So if you're looking for that group work that's high intensity with a lot of teaching, find me on all social media platforms.
Terrence, I love it. I appreciate it. Your time is always so valuable to us. Your information really priceless. So thank you very much, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I tell you what, I never take for granted the chance to talk to a guy like Terrence Edwards. Knows the game so well, insightful because of his relationship with current players and his status as a former player and a coach here in Georgia High School. You just really get a lot when you get Terrence Edwards on DawgNation Daily, and we are thankful for that. Now, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let me tell you right now, you hear me talk about this all the time, and I want you to know that 2025 is a great time for you to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I got to tell you, if it's me and I'm searching for the Royal Caribbean cruise vacation I want to take, the one thing that I'm going to be searching for off the top right away, which Royal Caribbean cruise vacations, which itinerary is going to take me to Perfect Day Coco Cay? Because of all the things that make Royal Caribbean an unbelievable vacation experience for your entire family, I don't know that anything sort of speaks to the specific value that Royal Caribbean offers more so than a chance to be at Perfect Day Coco Cay, the private island oasis right there in the middle of the Bahamas. It's really unlike anything I've ever experienced before because you've got, as you know, you've heard me say this, two distinctively different sides of the island. You've got the Thrill Water Park side that includes the tallest water slide in North America. You've got the chill side, kind of the chill where you have a chance to kind of relax. And really, what's kind of cool in the last year or so, because I am kind of a chill person at heart, I guess, so I do kind of enjoy, at least for part of the day, I like to sort of hang out over at Chill Island or the chill side of Perfect Day Coco Cay. They've actually made the chill part of the island a little bit more chill than it used to be because now you've got the Oasis Lagoon, the huge swimming pool, largest freshwater pool in the Bahamas, a huge swimming pool that's even kind of more chill. You've kind of got a lot more family-oriented over there. So if you got kids or something like that, you can hang out at the pool right there next to the beach. You've got the Royal Beach Club that's there too, which is always a lot of fun. You've got the incredible brand new adults-only enclave there, which is a lot of fun at Perfect Day Coco Cay. That's where if you want to get the Vegas-style pool and stuff like that, you can get, or I should say the Vegas-style pool party. Just whatever you think you would enjoy, Perfect Day Coco Cay's got it. In fact, Jessica Slater can tell you more about it, whether it be Hideaway Beach or anything else. She can tell you more about it. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. This is a great time for you to plan a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation here sometime in 2025. All right, let's talk about spring games for a moment. So the other day, Matt Rule, Nebraska coach, said he didn't want to have one. And we said this, I think, briefly yesterday, that what's really telling about this is that while Nebraska has not won much in most of our audience's lifetime, or a lot of our audience's lifetime, certainly if you're in your 20s, you have no memory of Nebraska being a great program, really. While they haven't won very much as of late, this is a very popular team. Nebraska has a huge following, and every year Nebraska has among the most attended spring games. So spring games in Lincoln, Nebraska is still pretty big business, but Matt Rule says he does not want to have one. He says that after their spring game a year ago, he had a lot of tampering with guys on his roster, coming after them, saying that, basically trying to steal guys off his roster they had seen play during his spring game. Of course, there is a portal window that opens briefly on the other side of spring practice. And so because of that, Matt Rule says he doesn't want to have one anymore. Well, now you've got another coach who's kind of talking about a similar thing for maybe a slightly different reason. So you've got Texas coach Steve Sarkisian saying that he's not into a spring game right now, citing the long season, 16 games that Texas played in 2024. He's saying that he does not want to have a spring game anymore either. He's concerned about player wear and tear after the long season in 2024, and is considering, as it's been reported by Chip Brown, who's a guy that's very close to the Texas program, a revamped spring football schedule that it could include no spring game. So here you have these two huge macro programs, Matt Rule, Nebraska, Steve Sarkisian in Texas, and for different reasons, they're talking about canceling the spring game. And honestly, I think you have to ask, what is going on here? Because for a lot of us, we do like the spring game. Now, admittedly, as Terrence was just talking about, I certainly understand there's sort of a pro wrestling aspect of this, which is it sort of seems like real competition and it sort of feels like real football, but some of this is just theatrics sort of put on for show. I get all of that. But honestly, shows are good, and theatrics and entertainment is the name of the game. And we are entertained by G-Day. I hope it lasts for my full lifetime, and I hope I live a whole lot longer. So when you got Sarkisian and Rule, Nebraska and Texas, these big programs talking about not having a spring game, as someone who really likes the spring games, makes me a little bit nervous. Well, here's what I believe. And I guess it doesn't take very much to sort of get me, moving in sort of a conspiratorial direction. I do admit that. But I sort of believe that most things in sports, whatever the real story is, it's not the story we're being given. For instance, everybody's sort of watching this sort of Luka Doncic thing this week, traded from the Mavericks. I think most of us have an intuition that the story we are being fed here at face value is not true. Something is going on here that no one's talking about, or at least no one's talking about publicly. We just sort of have that sense that whatever we're being fed, the main story, probably a cover story for something else. It doesn't take very much imagination to sort of get to that point. Well, I think the same thing is probably true when it comes to the spring game stuff too. Matt Rule says he's worried about, teams trying to steal guys off his roster. Steve Sarkisian said he's worried about wear and tear from last season, even though a lot of the players from last season's team are gone now. Both these guys come to the same conclusion that they don't want a spring game, but they apparently do it for different reasons. Here's what I believe is really going on. And at a certain point in time, college football has just got to make peace with this. I think the reason that certain coaches don't like spring games, or the kind of way in which spring practice currently culminates, I think the reason they don't like that is I don't think they want their own players knowing where they stand on the depth chart. For a long time, college coaches have worked very hard to make the hierarchy within the locker room seem mysterious. They do this with the two deeps they release before the games. Starters are not listed. It's so-and-so, or in some cases it's so-and-so, or a different so-and-so. They work very, very hard to believe we don't know who the starter is. We don't know who the 11 best guys are. We're going to determine this each week during practice. And in some case, competition is a good thing. And sometimes iron perhaps really does sharpen iron. Maybe that is the case. But also, it is just true that certain players have more value than other players do. The players themselves know this. They're fully aware of who is better and has more value and more important. I don't think they're necessarily all that surprised by the actual hierarchy, within a locker room. But no one likes the notion that they themselves are buried on a depth chart. And sometimes the spring game sort of makes that obvious. Now, it also sometimes has kind of the false positive of a guy who probably is buried on the depth chart just because of the randomness of football. Maybe he has a good game in that day, and all of a sudden now he's got a very false sense of how good he really is. There's some of that probably goes on. But, But the main thing is I don't think these coaches want players knowing that, hey, so-and-so is just better than you right now, and he's likely slated to start. And if he starts, he's also probably getting more money than you, and you are right now for us just backup. I think that's what's really happening here. And I think as we get more and more into the compensation model for college football, and that's, of course, going to be a huge part of this discussion moving forward, as we get more into that, I think coaches have got to be less afraid of letting players know where they stand. In the NFL, this happens all the time. You know who's ahead of you, and that guy's going to get treated differently than you get treated. College football has tried to kind of conceal some of this, and now coaches may be even willing to go as far as canceling their spring game to keep this more concealed. I just don't know that's going to work. Whether the spring games survive or not, this notion that everybody's equal in this locker room and it's the 11 guys who practice the best that are on the field, I don't know how much longer that's going to be able to be pushed. I was going to do a couple of other stories here on Greg Sankey and a coaching change coming to Notre Dame. Getting a little late. Let me save that for later on because the Sankey stuff is good enough that I want to spend some more time on that. Let me save those stories for later on. And for now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And part of the reason why I want to save that is I want to give due diligence here to Georgia basketball for getting a win last night against LSU. Now, the truth is that, listen, LSU's not a great team. Georgia winning was something that was expected to do. And yet it's still, I think, certainly worth giving Georgia credit for kind of a nice business-like, workman-like effort here, playing behind a home crowd. Obviously a very late start, probably not the same raucous environment Stegeman Coliseum has been at times this year, but Georgia's very comfortable at home, and they handled LSU last night pretty comfortably. And because of the work that Georgia has done in its pre-conference season, this is sort of all you have to do. Remember, Georgia was darn near perfect leading into SEC play. The win it got against St. John's continues to look better. Rick Pitino's doing a great job there with the Red Storm, and they're obviously they got another big win against Marquette this week. Looks like one of the best teams in the country right now, and Georgia's win against St. John's looks really, really good. So because of that, even with some struggles in SEC play, Georgia is still very much the potential of being a tournament team here. They're obviously probably, according to most of the bracketologists, kind of in the field right now, but maybe just barely. The other thing you're going to be a little bit careful of if you're Georgia at the moment, while you yourself are kind of on the bubble here a little bit, big game coming up on Saturday, hosting Mississippi State, while you yourself kind of on the bubble is also starting to get a little bit more crowded here too. Take, for instance, a team that has been awful for the most part this year, but did beat you and is suddenly getting hot. Arkansas went into Kentucky on Saturday. Razorbacks got the win. We talked about that. Huge homecoming game for John Calipari, and Calipari got the win. Well, Arkansas also won again last night, too. So this is a team starting to play a much better brand of basketball. And because of the SEC schedule, the fact that, sometimes it hurts you to play a bunch of good teams, but if you're trying to get your way into the tournament, it actually helps you to have chances to get what they call the quad one wins as measured by the NET. Arkansas is playing the sort of opponents that if it keeps winning, all of a sudden now it's in the tournament conversation, even after high-profile injury, a horrible start to the year. So Georgia has sort of bubble status right now, and at the moment they're probably on the right side of the bubble. But in a very deep SEC, some of the teams that have kind of been on the outside looking in, including Arkansas, starting to work their way into this discussion as well. There was something last night, too, that I thought, if you're a UGA fan, I think gives you a lot of hope for what the remainder of the season can be. At times this year, I don't know that I've seen from Blue Cane everything that I've sort of hoped for. Obviously, one of the guys that came back from last year's team that had a lot of promise. But, boy, you want to talk about last night, a darn near triple-double, a guy who distributed the basketball very well. Turnover's been an issue for UGA. Blue kind of playing a sort of a turnover-free brand of basketball, too, and doing a lot of this without kind of hitting the three-point shot. Really, really, which is, really, really impressive game from Blue Cane last night. And if you get more of this moving forward, then all of a sudden the kind of doldrums that Georgia was in while it's playing at Alabama and Auburn and Tennessee and the road loss to Arkansas, boy, easy to imagine better play from Georgia moving forward if you get more going ahead of what you got from Blue Cain last night. In fact, here is Georgia coach Mike White talking about Blue Cain after last night's game.
He is, as a freshman, I just said on the radio, he was a talented freshman that could make shots and was developing in other areas. And now he's a good player. Now he's a good SEC player who had a whale of a game and only made 1 3. Arguably his biggest strength, definitely last year and maybe early this year. But just rounding out his game, 8 assists and 0 turnovers, and really rebounded well, played really hard. Proud for him.
Yeah, so you love that from Blue Cain. Great job from him last night, and really a strong, solid Georgia win against LSU, setting itself up for another big home game on Saturday. Hopefully, last night, 9 p.m. start. A lot of Georgia fans can't get there for that. You would certainly love Georgia fans sort of pack the Stag on Saturday. By the way, last night, the Georgia students kind of cool. They got the, Spike, the very funny-looking inflated mascot. They gave out the Spike. Were they Crocs? Or how about that? What about Cody Chafin's just right there on the trigger for that. There's the giveaway for that. Is that crazy? I don't know if those are actually branded Crocs necessarily, but they are Spike shoes, footwear of some kind. Very, very funny stuff from Georgia basketball, kind of superimposing those on the players. Clever work by their social media and kind of a nice look for Georgia getting that win. And they've done a great job this year of kind of taking care of the students and finding these fun giveaways. Obviously, the story was they took some of the money. They would have been, perhaps fine if they stormed the court, and they kind of gave some of that money over to the student services. A lot of these giveaways, I guess, are kind of a function of that. So pretty cool stuff. Georgia gets a win. Seems like a lot of fun. Happy to see the Dogs, at least for now, continuing to be right there in the middle of that tournament conversation. Before we wrap up today, let me also give a shout-out to our friends at Daytona Beach. Of course, the Great American Race coming up here very soon, but it doesn't have to be motorsports related for you to want to make some travel to Daytona Beach. Easy to get to. International Airport takes you right there to it. And, boy, you talk about awesome when it comes to delicious restaurants, wonderful resorts and hotels, outdoor activities, fishing and surfing. There's a lot of golf around there. Just a wonderful, wonderful experience. Some great sightseeing opportunities, too. Just a great, great place to visit. Grew up going to Daytona Beach. Have so many great memories from there. And, honestly, it's a great time to make some new memories at Daytona Beach as well. So check out DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that. That is DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that today. Of course, coming up in April, we're getting ready for our DawgNation Cruise. We've been doing our Kroger Cruise giveaway. Our buddy Wise Dog on X, some of y'all know him, former DawgNation cruiser, seeing our promotion for our cruise giveaway on X yesterday. Says, I've been on this cruise twice. I highly recommend. Let me tell you something. I appreciate Wise Dog's willingness to sort of share the good news for that. We do have a good time on our DawgNation Cruise. We appreciate the hundreds of Georgia fans who join us for it. It is always an incredible experience, and we hope to see you on board, whether it be this year or some future year on our DawgNation Cruise this year on Utopia of the Seas. Always a lot of fun. So for Wise Dog's willingness to share that, we will give him a golden shoe here today. Lousy, stinking Gators will give them the boot. How about that? 1,552 days. That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. This number keeps on climbing to unforeseen heights. We're proud of it. Eddie and his $1 million bill, he loves that. We'll see you back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air-conditioned heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. Hope you're doing great today. We'll get some of your comments and let you get rolling here on a Thursday. Getting ready for the Super Bowl. Getting ready for the stretch run for Georgia basketball. UGA baseball getting very close to getting started. Really excited about that. Bill Sanders says the Daytona Beach Hooters is a really good one right across the street from the racetrack. It is indeed. I've been there before. And, yeah, a lot of fun. A lot of fun for sure. A lot of fun for sure. Jacob O'Neill says the live notification just popped up. Yeah, this is one of those things that, I'll give you a little inside baseball here for a moment. If you want to go back many years ago, Facebook was by far and away our largest video platform. Not ever quite as big as the podcast, but in fact, most days, far below the podcast. But if you want to go back years ago, it was the biggest video platform. But for whatever reason, a few years ago, they just stopped sending out notifications. And it's their platform. They own it, their business. But, our audience numbers from Facebook just changed, pretty significantly based on the fact that a lot of people do depend on the notification to know the show is live. I always tell people, listen, whether you get the notification or not, you should know we're here because we are DawgNation Daily. We're committed to the daily part of this, but the notification just stopped going out. And so at that point in time, the other platforms started growing. In fact, we sort of started the show on DawgNation. And this is all kinds of inside baseball, but we sort of started the show on DawgNation.com because of how weird Facebook got. So, and we just couldn't really depend on that anymore. A lot of people, when the social media platforms make a change, they sort of throw up their hands in disgust and just sort of panic. We, took proactive action, and we really replaced our Facebook audience with the DawgNation.com audience. But yeah, the notifications do not go out. They do not go out. Marshall Fleming said we had a lot of fun at Coco Cay on the adult side of the ship. I should say the pool bar. I met a lot of people we never saw on the ship. Yeah, it's a great experience. The Hideaway Beach that's there now at Perfect Day Coco Cay, and this is not an ad, I'm just talking to you as a friend here. I think it's a huge addition for Perfect Day Coco Cay, because it's really fun. I like the DJ and the pool. I like that kind of Vegas pool party scene. Now, I'm not like a wild dancer or anything like that, but just kind of a fun vibe to be in. You're sort of sitting at the pool chair, maybe you're reading a magazine or something like that. I like the kind of vibe that exists around that. It's really fun. They have the cool canopies kind of over the pool and the swim up bars it's a really really cool experience. It's the kind of cool experience I don't get in my life if I'm not on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, if that makes sense. And because you've built this adults only area, and by adults only I mean it's just not for kids. It's not like XXX like that. It's just adults only. Because of that, like I said before, like Oasis Lagoon has now become an awesome place for families and kids playing in the pool, things like that, because the sort of pool party got taken to Hideaway Beach. So Royal Caribbean's really good about this. They'll build a new thing, whether it's on ship or in a place like Perfect Day Coco Cay, and that thing may not be for you. For instance, on Utopia of the Seas, like the boardwalk area has been sort of made even more just for kids. And if you don't have kids, well, you're not, maybe into that. But the people who do have kids, now they're gravitating to that, which frees up other space for you to enjoy. And Royal Caribbean's just been really good about saying, okay, you got this thing for this group of people and this thing for that group of people. Everybody sort of gravitates towards their thing, and it just creates more space, which I think is awesome. Gary Holt on the subject of doing away with the foul rule. Well, I'll tell you right now, you watch enough college basketball games, you'll think they have done away with the foul rule. I also went to a high school game the other night, and I've not been to a high school basketball game in a while. Man, they didn't call anything. And I'm not talking about from like a complaint about the ref standpoint. The best that I could tell is going both ways. They didn't call anything. This was like a wrestling match. It was, I don't know if all college basketball, or I should say high school basketball, is officiated that way now, or if it was just this particular game. But boy, it was loose. It was loosely officiated, very loosely officiated. Let's see what else. Brian Whitaker on the subject of Perfect Day Coco Cay and cost. So here's the thing. It's free to get on Perfect. That comes as a part of your cruise fare. So you can go to Perfect Day Coco Cay and eat the included food and, enjoy the kind of the included beverages, and you can go on and walk back off without spending anything. Now, obviously, if you want alcoholic beverage and things like that, there's a cost associated with it. But what I love is if you purchase the drink package, which, gives you sort of access to unlimited beverages, if you get the deluxe, if you purchase the drink package, that works while you're at Perfect Day Coco Cay. So you're saving a lot of money from, let's say you go to one of the resorts for a day and Nassau or like Cozumel or somewhere like that, where when you step off the ship, all of a sudden now you're sort of paying retail price at somebody else's establishment. If you're at a place like Perfect Day Coco K and Labadee and Haiti kind of work the same way, your drink package is going to work while you're on the island, which I think is really great. And once again, this is not like an ad. I'm just telling you, as somebody who enjoys this sort of travel, why I like it. David Valentine says he's got a busy day on the JOB. Well, David, we appreciate you getting the job done, and we appreciate you joining us when you can. William Camacho talking about Georgia needing another win on Saturday against Mississippi State. You better believe that's the case. Kirk Schultz, thank you for the kind words. He says 7 a.m., 5 days a week. Kirk lives out west, the Pacific Northwest. Says this is my favorite thing to listen to on Facebook. I really appreciate that, Kirk. Thank you very much. Means a lot to me. I really appreciate that. Let's see what else. UJ Marine talking about how, spring games could sort of evolve in the future into a version of Fan Day. Maybe that's the case, but golly, man, it's still a good TV product down here in the South. Georgia enjoys theirs. And, the one thing I like about Georgia is A, you got separate teams using regular scoring, touchdowns, field goals, not this sort of, crazy system that some of these teams use. Plus, a lot of these spring games are, I mentioned pro wrestling earlier, they're essentially pro wrestling in that you put the number one offense against like the number 3 defense in some cases, trying to like get a predetermined outcome of the offense looking good and everybody goes home happy. Georgia, to its credit, it's always done pretty close to a real football game where ones take on ones, twos take on twos, and you're getting real legitimate competition. Thankfully, y'all, we can't take this for granted. For however much longer it lasts, Georgia does a real spring game that functions a lot like a regular football game, and I would say that's a pretty good thing. Garrison Tucker wondering if Georgia runs more kind of in between the tackles with Nate Frazier and Gunnar Stockton. Perhaps that's the case. Also, when you see some of the stuff that ETM is doing at the Senior Bowl, you're also sort of led to believe that, hey, man, if you can kind of set the edge a little bit better on the outside of your blocking scheme, there's some stuff, whether you call it a toss sweep, call it something else, there's some of that stuff on the outside that could still be unleashed too. One way or another, the Georgia rushing stats in 2024 were just anemic. And you want to blame that on Mike Bobo, you want to blame that on Stacey Searles, you want to blame that on the performance of the offensive line, you can blame it on anything. And I think it's probably all fair game. It just has to be better. It just has to be better. Just has to be better. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. Let me go over to YouTube here just for a moment. Yard Dog says he wishes Nakobe Dean wasn't injured for the Super Bowl. Yeah, I do too. It'd be fun to see him out there. Obviously, we enjoyed the other day the tribute that Nolan Smith paid to Nakobe Dean running out on the field with his uniform. Or not uniform. He didn't have the full uniform. He just had the jersey. But it was a nice thing to be able to see. Baruch Dog, going back to the NIL topic earlier, says, it's the game these agents are playing. They want kids to flip schools so they can get a cut of the cash. So they make up stories. It happened to Jordan Addison, who was told USC would give him $1 million, and it didn't happen. I definitely heard that rumor. I don't know if it's true or not, that Addison went to USC, didn't get the money he was promised. And we're going to do some of the Greg Sankey stuff tomorrow. This is a lot of what Sankey's kind of talking about. And listen, the modest part of me takes pains to admit this, but there's a lot about the NIL world we got exactly right. And one of the things we talked about was the idea that a lot of these collectives are paying out far more money than they're bringing in. And one way or another, that's just not sustainable. And, I don't know that the advent of the kind of revenue sharing that we're about to have once the House settlement finally takes shape, I don't know that's going to change things all that much, just simply because let me not say that, but I was about to make an analogy to another thing in life that, you know how like they say, well, we're going to give you down payment assistance. The government's going to give this to you. And people always come back and say, well, that's just going to make the cost of housing going up because all of a sudden now you're just pumping a bunch more money into the economy. I think the same thing's perhaps true with the revenue sharing stuff of like, I don't know that revenue sharing payments are going to replace the NIL. It's just going to sort of essentially act as like inflation within the player compensation world, I think. But the point is that, there was a race from a collective standpoint to be as big as you could get, as fast as you could get. Same way like Silicon Valley, tech firms, things like that operate. The job is to get big quick, and profit is not a consideration. Churn rate is what you're looking for. And I think a lot of collectives are operating that way. And some of them are just going to be insolvent. And, who knows we ever hear about this or not, but when you play a risky game like this, there is a huge potential downside. And that's where, like, when the private equity stuff starts coming in, private equity is just a fancy way of saying loan, and oftentimes loan at unfavorable conditions. And, for someone like Sankey, who I've had my issues with, for him to be concerned about this, I think there's a reason, there's justifiable reason for that. Let me go to YouTube here for a moment. Alan Hampton, very, very kind words, says we're knowledgeable and informative. I really appreciate that. Man, that makes me, we try to offer value and we try to give our thing, and I just really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Jonathan Aaron says, with all the comings and goings, who won the coaching search? Well, I think you can make this case, Jonathan, and we're going to do this too. Like, Notre Dame just lost its running backs coach to the Raiders. Ohio State's lost both coordinators. Notre Dame lost Al Golden to the NFL. Both the teams that played for last year's national championship thus far seem to have lost the coaching search, right? Brian Hartline has been promoted as Ohio State offensive coordinator. They almost had to do this, and this is another thing we got to get to in the show. They almost had to promote Hartline because Hartline's probably the most important position coach in America. And I think even as a Georgia fan, we'd probably say Brian Hartline, the Ohio State wide receivers coach, is probably the most important position coach in America. But if you pass over him again as offensive coordinator, he may not be your guy anymore. Hartline made a lot of money playing in the NFL. He could just sit out a coaching cycle or two if he wanted to, you would think anyway. So they have now promoted him to offensive coordinator, and they almost had to do it. And Hartline's a very, very crucial member of their player acquisition team. But if he was a good OC, you might be led to believe he would have already been the offensive coordinator. So complete inexperience in Hartline compared to a guy who's been an NFL head coach and a successful college coach in Chip Kelly. Boy, it seems like that's a pretty big downgrade at OC. So much so that you wonder if Ryan Day has to get back involved in that some. And obviously that comes with its own issues. And then you're going to make a change over at defensive coordinator too. And I just think the results speak for themselves in terms of Jim Knowles' impact at Ohio State. They were way better defensively once he got hired. That clearly has to matter. So I think you can make the case that the two championship teams, the teams that played for the championship, probably lost the coaching search. So therefore, who won it? I mean, Alabama brings in Ryan Grubb. How much bigger stuff has gone on than that? Is there any other, really major hiring that sort of makes it seem like somebody did something, far more dramatic than that right now? We haven't had a bunch of crazy stuff, have we? I think you could make a case that right now Ohio State looks like a pretty big loser in terms of the coaching losses, and they'll say we won the national championship, which is true. But we also saw Michigan a year after winning a national championship kind of dissolve a little bit. You kind of wonder, will Ohio State have any kind of step back after all of this? Lewis Sutherland says, until a player union and a collective bargaining agreement's established, it's going to be the wild, wild west. Maybe that's the case, but I have to say, and this is one of the things we talk about sometimes, I'm really against this. Look, when it comes to someone like Kirby Smart, for instance, you can say what you want to about Smart, but Smart is a college football lifer. He's been involved in this almost his entire professional life, probably will be for as long as he works. This is not some guy that just sort of floated into the sport because he thought it looked like kind of a cool gig And if it doesn't work out, he'll go try to, do something else. Like, Smart, and he's not the only one who's like this. He's just the example that we're using. I mean, he's dedicated to college athletics. My problem is when you start bringing in the collective bargaining, it's not the players who are bargaining. It's their agents who are bargaining. And these agents are not college football lifers. They're people who are kind of swooping in because they see a quick and easy buck to make. They're a lot more willing to be, I think, risky with the sorts of decisions they would make or the kinds of influence they would try to exert. And it's the same way, too, if the schools, like you commonly hear, like Florida State, for instance, or someone like that, taking on private equity money as a way of giving them a financial advantage they don't feel like they currently have. Well, as I said before, that's just a fancy loan. And honestly, a lot of private equity firms get involved very, very aggressively in the hopes they can make a quick, outrageous profit. And if it doesn't work and if the company sort of falls apart, that's sort of built into their business model, that they'll have some business failures along the way to trying to 10x just enough of these to be a profitable business overall. Like, do you want that sort of transactional thinking in college football? I would suggest that you probably don't. So I am for anything that makes college football still feel like college football, because I think the more this feels like something different, it's sort of a threat. Because the one thing that makes college football different than the NFL, while NFL careers can be short, the average is only about 4 years, many NFL careers are also a lot longer than that. But no college career is longer than 4 years. That's, college football is currently, anyway, a short-term proposition. So the people that would be negotiating on behalf of the players in any kind of collective bargaining, they don't have any incentive to do long-term thinking. In other words, if you're trying to get the best deal for yourself as a player, you don't care what college football looks like 5 years from now. You want to extract the most money you can right now. And I get players fighting for their own self-interest, but what does that do for the next generation of player? We don't have to speculate about this. We see this. The next generation of player, many of them will tell you they can't even get a scholarship right now because the current system has leveraged a benefit to them in the near term and essentially telling the next generation of player to go pound sand and kick rocks. We see the way in which short-term thinking is hurting players right now. We don't have to speculate about what that might look like going forward. Let's see what else. Mellow number 7 says Ohio State will never dissolve. Come on, man, do your research. Well, I don't need to do research on that. I don't mean they're going to disappear as a program. And perhaps dissolve's the wrong word to use. I don't think what I said was that difficult to misunderstand. Obviously, Ohio State's still going to be a good team, but we did see Michigan a year after winning a national championship take a step back. It's not impossible that Ohio State would take a step back, too, given the fact that they went 10 years without winning a national championship. The idea they're going to be right back in the same conversation again, I'll beg your pardon to say, let's wait and see. Frank Patterson says, do you think it's funny how these wide receivers transfer to play for Mike Bobo? I do believe that Frank is probably onto something, and we don't try to stir the pot on this too much. But I do believe there's a perception of Bobo from players that perhaps is a little bit different than the perception of Bobo from fans. I think there's a chance that's true. I do. Let's get a few more comments. Bulldog Big E said, BA finally said something insightful. Well, there you go. That was worth waiting on, perhaps. He agrees about the spring game depth chart deal. Yeah, I think that's probably what this is. I don't think coaches want players to know where they stand in actuality or on their roster. And so if that's the first insightful thing I've ever said in the eyes of Bulldog Big E, well, I'm glad. I'm glad his patience with me finally paid off. Spencer Clark says college football is a step away from being overseen by Elon Musk next. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like we've said before, that college football is unlike almost any other sporting entity in that college football is uniquely American. There is no thing in international sports that looks anything like college football. College football is you don't have sports attached to schools, for instance, in like Europe and places like that. That's just not something that exists. You know, our college football thing, this dates back to the time of Teddy Roosevelt. We won't get into the history here today, but when you think about like sort of the actual forefather of American college football, in some respects, it's Teddy Roosevelt. Like there's nothing like college football anywhere else. And that's why I think it ought to be protected. It's our only uniquely American sport, even more so than like, say, even college basketball. And certainly like the professional sports like Major League Baseball, a lot of international players come here to play in it. NBA is almost overtaken by international players now. The American players have completely just sort of ceded the sport over to the international players. Remarkable. And the NFL, while it's American players who play it, they basically try to import the sport to other places. Export, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Playing games now in, Australia, Brazil, obviously in Europe for a long time. But college football is uniquely American, which is going to be tricky going forward because the more in which the streamers get involved in like the TV contracts and things like that, and there's going to be obviously a lot more of that. Look at what Netflix typically pays for. Look at what Apple typically pays for. To a certain extent, Amazon too, but certainly Netflix and Apple for sure. The sporting stuff they go after is sports with global appeal. Half the movies on Netflix are like international movies. Apple is sort of a global company too. These are sports with global appeal. And so college football, as popular as it is never going to have global appeal. College football is the second most popular sport in America, but it's nowhere near the top spots when it comes to international global appeal. College football is just not a global sport. And so when it comes to the streamers, I think a lot of these people are not going to know what to do with college football. It's obviously very popular here in America, and it's especially popular in what is sort of an unpopular region of America down in the South, especially popular in our corner of the world here. But as you try to grow and grow and grow, and you sort of take on the shareholder mentality of it must grow every year no matter what, as you push this sort of thing, it's going to get tricky because college football is just not like a lot of other sports. We would say that's okay, but when it comes to the sort of big business types who might want to get involved, it's not going to very easily fit into one of their boxes, which is going to be a little bit tricky. Gary Roach says he's just like DawgNation, hoping the spring games continue, especially at Georgia. Very much the same way. Tyron Brown says, I love listening every weekday morning there in my dump truck. This is exactly what we were talking about yesterday. The thing that makes me feel like I do important work is the fact that people who are doing important work, I'm talking about moving dirt, building things, and creating stuff that didn't used to exist. That's real work, right? It's not pushing a piece of paper around. No offense to those who do that. It's not, financializing every aspect of the economy. This is like real work of moving something somewhere else, making dirt look different than it used to look, making it more palatable to build structures on. That's real work. Tyron Brown says while he's doing that real work, he's listening to our show. There is no better compliment. There is no better compliment. If you told me I could have, President of the United States, Governor of Georgia, senators, or I could have Tyron in a dump truck listening, I'll take Tyron in a dump truck, listen to this show. If I'm pronouncing his name correctly, maybe it's Tyrone. I'll take that over anything else any day of the week. That is awesome. Thank you very much. And if I mispronounce your first name, I apologize. Let us get a couple more, then we're going to get ready to go. Anything else? Spencer Clark on the subject of top quarterbacks in college football. I think this is going to be a pretty fun conversation. I sort of think this past year, 2024, and some of this because, guys like Carson Beck were just disappointments. And obviously Beck was hurt badly by the drops. We all know that, but he still didn't play as well as he could have. Even if you add, 700 drop yards to his total, I still think that, a little bit of a disappointing year for Carson Beck. But the point is in a roundabout way, it's sort of a down year for quarterbacks in college football, right? It's like Quinn Ewers wasn't great. Carson wasn't great. You had a guy like Cam Ward who was really good. National championship quarterback was Will Howard. Howard didn't really play good football until the end of the year, although he played great when it mattered. This was just not really a great – like Jalen Milroe didn't have a great season. This was – except for one game. This was just not really a great year for quarterbacks. So I'd say the sport overall is due for better quarterback play in 2025. And honestly, the SEC quarterbacks are going to be fascinating. Lenore Sellers may be the best, kind of came out of nowhere this past year. I agree. DJ Lagway, I think, could be a lot to deal with at Florida. And that could dramatically change the fortunes for Florida. It really could. I think it's a real show-me year for Nico Iamaleava. I think that's pretty fascinating. You start digging a little deeper. Garrett Nussmeier coming back from LSU is a big deal. Jackson Arnold transferring from Oklahoma to Auburn's a big deal. And it's not even obvious that Arnold will start. A guy like Deuce Knight could potentially overtake him. But I also would believe that for Arnold, who was a little bit – the whole thing about him getting benched at Oklahoma was a little bit weird. I think there's a chance that Jackson Arnold could be way better at Auburn than he was before. I mean, I've really got Auburn circled as a team that I think could be dramatically improved, as much as you may not want to hear that. What's going to happen in Alabama? That's a true open quarterback competition, I believe, although I would favor Austin Mack in it. You got Pribula coming over from Penn State. He'll start at Missouri. That's probably worth paying perhaps a bit of attention to. I think Austin Simmons at Ole Miss, and we saw Simmons come in for a drive against Georgia, and he looked pretty good. A team that we think might take a step back this year is Ole Miss, but gosh, if Simmons is really good, maybe that changes. So, and of course, Gunnar Stockton is in the mix and all this too. So I'm sort of here for the quarterback talk for 2025. I think it's going to be really a good, fun discussion. Lance also mentioning Marcel Reed at A&M could be a difference maker between another 8-win season and a playoff berth. Yeah, I mean, I do think that Reed's going to get his look there too. I think you're right about that, Lance. Brodo Baggins says that Nuss is the Heisman front runner right now. Heisman front runner is probably something you don't quite want to be. Does he really have better odds for that than Arch does? And I'll go on record as saying I think that Arch Manning's will probably be a pretty good quarterback. And there was good positive buzz about him last spring. I think there's a chance that given a full season, he would have even been better than Quinn Ewers this year. They just didn't quite want to do that. Brodo Baggins also mentioned Diego Pavia. I'm really happy to have him back in the league. I love watching him play. But even if you are sort of okay with Arch, being the favorite to win the Heisman Trophy, historically speaking, is not really a place you want to be. Let us see what else. Dogcatcher26 says that college football is dying just like college basketball has. I mean, I would say that the demise of college basketball is pretty exaggerated because the gyms are still full during the week. The tournament is still, a gigantic sporting event. You make a case the NCAA basketball tournament, maybe the second biggest sporting event in America. I mean, it's still a gigantic event. College basketball doesn't have any life on, like, say, First Take or, some of these sort of talky shows. It feels less culturally important than it once did. But college basketball is still doing okay as a business. And college football is obviously, for the moment, still thriving. Do I think it has problems? And do I think those problems are potentially existential crisis? I kind of do. However, I'm also fairly optimistic that somebody smart is going to do something eventually to argue on behalf of the sport and why it deserves to exist in a form that's recognizable to us. I think one of the things that somebody's just going to realize eventually is when it comes to all of this chaos being imposed on us, change being forced on us, we can just say no. We can just say no. No is an answer. That is a reasonable answer. You got to do this. You got to do that. You can actually say no. They will never make you think you can, but you can. You can just say no. You can just say no. You can draw a line in the sand and say, we believe this institution, college football, benefits the common good, and therefore we're going to choose to protect it. And if you do, I believe you'll eventually win. Let's see what else. Kyle Hendricks from Bulldog Pools listening to DawgNation Daily. Listen, I love my time around the pool. That's important work too. That's awesome. And I know if you're doing like the pool work and things like that, you're kind of getting into that time of year. Now, luckily, unlike some places, now you go to like Ohio, somewhere like that, where the ground like truly freezes, you ain't doing pools 12 months a year. I'm guessing you can, for the most part, do 12-month a year pool work around here. We don't have frozen ground, but still people get excited about their pools. Your Clark Griswold, you get your Christmas bonus. You're ready to put that pool in the ground. I'm sure people will get more excited about that sort of thing this time of year. So as you're cranking up for what I'm guessing is a busy season, Kyle, we appreciate you being here. Thank you very much. Lewis Sutherland says he thinks that Sark would have played Manning if he was better than Ewers. Maybe so. But, I mean, I can tell you this, having talked to people who know some people who know some people who know some people around Tuscaloosa in 2017, they all knew that Tua was better than Jalen Hurts. Everybody in that program knew Tua was better than Jalen Hurts. But Saban, we're led to believe, maybe didn't want to make the move against Jalen Hurts until he absolutely had to. And unfortunately, the halftime of the national championship game, he absolutely had to. But keep this in mind. I mean, Davin told us this before. Kirby told the team at halftime he thought Tua was going to come into the game. You can't pull the trigger on a move like that, as unorthodox as it is, unless you had a lot of reason to believe that it was a sound decision, which means you had seen Tua outplaying Hurts in scrimmages. And people who attended those scrimmages have told us that's what happened. In the case of, brief moments we saw Manning, he wasn't exactly like, thriving. He had a couple of deer in headlight moments against Georgia in October. There was one of those. But Ewers was unspectacular enough. I'm not a fan of Ewers' game. I don't think that Ewers is anywhere near a special player. I think there is some consideration sometimes for, hey, people are watching to see what you do with Arch Manning, but future quarterbacks are also watching to see how you handle, your current established starter. You go back to the time of Steve Spurrier, he's yanking quarterbacks in, jerking them out, every other play. That would not fly in 2025. That kind of stuff wouldn't fly in 2025. You want to be measured with how you handle your quarterback. So you might be true. You might be telling the truth. I have my suspicions, though. Let us see what else. How about this? So Midmon 11 says that he's listening to the show like always before getting ready to operate 2-mile-long freight train in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle. First of all, that is like the kid in me loves the idea of like being a train engineer. Like what an amazing job that is. And Midmon, I really appreciate you listening to the show. Stuff like that just is fascinating to me. Like a train that's 2 miles long rolling through the Pacific Northwest. Yeah, our producer, Cody Chafins, wants to do a show from the train, which is actually a really good idea. Like, can you imagine what that scenery must look like? I mean, I've always had this sort of like quaint relationship with, I just think trains are amazing. You roll through the countryside, you see all this stuff. And in fact, you kind of wonder, this is very deep in the weeds, but the U.S. Open course up there in Seattle, Chambers Bay, they have a train track that goes right beside it. You go by Chambers Bay. What an amazing thing that must be. Midmon, what a cool thing That is to hear. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Boy, that's awesome. 2-mile-long train going through Seattle. Listen to DawgNation Daily. That is awesome. And that, my friends, is real work. You don't realize the work that our truck drivers and our train engineers, people like that, you don't realize what they're doing for you until one day that stuff's not in the grocery store anymore. You know, like the stuff they're moving is what moves America. Food and clothes and stuff like that. So thank goodness for our trains, man. Thank goodness. By the way, Brodo Baggins, in honor of that, gives you who's that coming down the track, which is a very appropriate thing to say in light of all of that. Boy, that's amazing. That makes my day. JC talking about, guys on NFL rosters makes me think by tomorrow, Cody's a smart guy. Maybe he has some thoughts on this. So we're led to believe that there are a couple of LSU players on one of the two scout teams, but nobody on the active roster. We would say that means that Georgia now owns by itself the streak of Super Bowl participants. If LSU is only claiming practice squad guys, nothing wrong being on a practice squad, that's a good living. But if they're only claiming practice squad guys, then Georgia's streak that it has shared with LSU for the Super Bowl, we would say that deservedly Georgia now has that streak by themselves. What's your take on that?
I would say, yeah, if the guys are inactive, I don't know what the nuance of the streak is, but it says to me if they're inactive on game day or they're not on the active roster to even be chosen for that, yeah.
So do we then?
And I'm trying to go back and think, like, did we get a Georgia player through that way? Like the early part of that record is like Patrick Pass a lot for the Patriots.
John Stinchcomb is in the early part of that.
Right.
Going back to what?
That's a long time ago, isn't it?
Yeah.
Don't tell him I said that. But yeah, I'm trying to think, was there like a year or two that we had at Georgia? Because there was a while there where there weren't as many Georgia players in the NFL.
That's right.
So it makes me wonder. I would have to go back and kind of look at how they're calculating that. But to me, that's, LSU.
Because 24 years in a row is an incredibly long streak. And, I mean, if I was, I guess, more ambitious, I'd go do more of the research about how it is that Georgia actually got the 24 years. Did one guy show up several years that kind of made the streak a little easier?
Patrick Pass on the Patriots had to help. Hines Ward, you think about.
Ben Watson have been a little bit like that too.
Right.
But it's a cool thing. And, if Georgia claimed a practice squad player, it cannot now punish LSU for doing the same thing. But I want to see the graphic from Georgia saying the only school to have a Super Bowl participant 24 years in a row. If they say that without mentioning LSU by name, they are essentially claiming the title themselves. It's a little bit like the famous social media post from a couple of years ago where the Penn State put out, been in every Super Bowl except for 3 since whatever year. Maybe Georgia will kind of lay claim to this record by themselves. I hope they do anyway. I hope they do. So Midmond, by the way, says the trains they usually run are between 15,000 and 18,000 tons, but now some days they're 3 miles long and they're 32,000 tons. I feel like I get stopped behind some of the 3-mile trains every now and then. There's all kinds of train tracks near where I live. We're trying to get my son to baseball practice, my daughter to gymnastics, and just get stopped by these trains. But I still like to see them. It's amazing. I'd love to do that. We've done the thing on like Christmas where you like go up in mountains and do the Christmas train and stuff like that. I love all of that. I love all of that. That's great. Like my son, like a lot of boys, you kind of go through that phase of life early where you're just so into trains. Back then, boy, he was. Some people never grow out of that. They just go on to just act. Like my son, when he's in pre-K, they hold up the sign about like what you want to do when you grow up. And he wanted to be a train driver. That was his little sign that he held up. He's probably grown out of some of that since then. But some people never do grow out of that. They just become trained people forever.
All right, so here's some more research here.
Okay.
How about shout out, I guess, Mark Weiser, Athens Banner Herald, actually.
Does good work.
Together a list of all the dogs. So the Slim Pickens years were Danny Ware in 2012 with the Giants.
He was active roster, though, right?
Okay, I think he was. I just remember him being interviewed like on Super Bowl opening night, one of the late night shows. DeMarcus Dobbs on the Seahawks in 2015.
Okay.
We'll have to check that one. The other ones, it's more than one guy on a lot of those. So makes you think 2020 McColl was the only guy, but he was.
He was a major player, yeah.
And then Tim Jennings on the Colts, who would have been playing in 2007. So those are the only ones with just one singular guy holding up the record. So maybe DeMarcus Dobbs. I don't remember his NFL career very much, I'll be honest. So I'll have to go back and look at that one.
Yeah, I don't either, so we'll check that. But if we can clear those two off, then we've essentially said these are all active roster players. And look, I'll be the first to tell you, there is a degree of this which is somewhat random. I'm saying it's somewhat random because Georgia's not the only program that has a lot of players in the NFL. But as you say, as you kind of get into the successful Rick years and certainly into the Kirby years, all of a sudden now it's not just like sort of one guy at the end of the bench. Now it's like, on Sunday it's like half the starting defense, right? So it's become more and more of a real prolific thing here where, hey, maybe you kind of got the sort of dribbler through the infield to keep the streak alive in one year, but all of a sudden now you're getting solid contact line drives on these guys that are making it. And in most cases, Georgia had an active player on 3 of the 4 conference finalists, I believe.
Don't know that one.
I think they had
on this year, you mean?
Yes.
Definitely.
Everybody but Washington, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, but there's nobody on Commanders.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, we knew.
You got James Cook, obviously.
Yeah, we knew pretty early on in the playoffs that Georgia was going to keep its Super Bowl streak alive because it got down to everybody left in the AFC had at least one Georgia player. So there's going to be an AFC team in the Super Bowl. So we knew weeks ago that Georgia was going to have a Super Bowl participant again. So I think it's kind of fun. And the longer it goes, the more fun it obviously gets.
Here's your last thing. DeMarcus Dobbs did have 3 tackles in the divisional round of that year. That makes me think he was active roster.
That's a big-time playoff guy right there. He's making plays in the playoffs. So I feel like that Georgia needs to put out the tweet. The only school with a player 24 years in a row. Let it be known we're claiming this streak for ourselves. If they have not done that yet, they need to do it, and that's actually pretty awesome. All right, we got to go. Gosh, we've stretched this thing till 22. All right, good stuff, everybody. Appreciate that. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. This nice warm weather makes you think about AC units. Eventually, you'll need to get yours tuned back up, stay cool and comfortable. Get the new pool coming in, maybe. That's one of our folks were talking about earlier. Get your AC tuned up to go with that. Find them online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric, online, rsandrews.com. RS stands for Rapid Service. See you tomorrow. One big day to close out the show. Get you ready for the Super Bowl. Heavy dog presence there. We'll see you then. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Have a great day, everybody.